Hi. Yeah, so we're going to talk about hallucinations in the context of software testing. A lot of software testers are scared of hallucinations. They're very spooky things, uh, and they use them as an excuse not to use AI. There's a lot of fear mongering too, by the way, from people that don't want AI to be useful for their own kind of personal reasons. But the reality is that um, usually, so what is a hallucination? A hallucination is when you ask the AI or an LLM some kind of question, then it makes up an answer. It tells you something that's either not true or it's just kind of strange and bizarre. And this happens on occasion. The big, great, classic example is, recently, if you asked Google or Gemini how to um, keep cheese on your pizza, how to keep it from falling off, the recommendation was to use glue, right? That's kind of funny. It's like a Reddit post somewhere. But then people literally at testing conferences will use this as an example to say the AIs are dangerous or too unreliable to use. Well, that's a ridiculous question. And if you need help keeping the cheese on your pizza, maybe you shouldn't be testing software. Um, Another example was all of hallucinations in general is that um, if you ask a question that doesn't have an answer, and we'll get into details about this in a second, but it will try to answer it, right? Um, but that's, uh, but if you ask it to just do basic things and normal things and testing things, the things don't usually hallucinate. In fact, the other best example was that's uh, funny to me is that because hallucinations come because the machines are actually creative, right? So a lot of human testers are not sophisticated enough to realize that these machines can kind of start to think, the beginnings of reasoning. And so there's this classic hilarity ensues when somebody gave a presentation about how AI is so dumb because it asked the AI to help it test a website that doesn't exist. And guess what the AI did? It helped them. It came up with test cases and had thoughts on it. And you know what's funny? The website didn't exist. The machine was able to assume what type of website it was, what type of features it would have. And when you look at the text, it says, I'm assuming it would have this on the page, and it probably has something like this. And this is how I would test it. And the person didn't even give a screenshot or a mock or anything, right? Like the AI was trying to go along with their bizarre idea and still be helpful. To me, that's not necessarily even hallucination. That's called creativity. And I feel bad for the AI having to work with such a poor pair tester, pair programmer that's just going to be rude and is trying to set it up. But that's actually pretty amazing. It can follow along. That's what I think is actually amazing. Um, so in some aspects, hallucination is actually creativity, particularly in the context of software testing. So why do LLMs hallucinate? And there's a lot of research papers and stuff going on trying to figure it out. And we may never know what's really going on because they're just really complex systems, just like a person. Like, why does a person lie or make up or pretend to not be able to use an AI to do software testing? You'll never really know the truth, right? You can guess. But I think one strong reason the LMs hallucinate is that after they're created, they create the brain, they go through some reinforcement learning with human feedback, right? And um, what they're trained to do is whatever you type in, instead of just auto completing the sentence, which is kind of how they're trained, they've been conditioned almost brutally to give an answer at all costs. And by the way, to also they're trained essentially that the person asking the question is correct, that they're always wrong. If you notice, they always apologize. They always go, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I made a mistake," even if the person made a mistake. Um, so they're trained to be um, I'm trying to think of a polite word, but helpful at all costs, even to the point of saying things that they have low confidence in. Um, so in a weird way, you should feel bad for the LMs, but realize it's like you're working with somebody that is worried they're going to be fired if even if you ask a stupid question, if they don't make you feel good about their answer, they're going to be fired. And so treat them cautiously, and realize this is part of their training. So a good example is like if you asked how, say, Tariq King, a friend of mine in the software world, how he created 5,000 software testing tools, AI-based ones in the early 1990s, right? Which of course he didn't do. He didn't do that last year either, but he didn't do it. But if you asked an LLM a year ago, an AI, it would hallucinate, and it might even invent and start telling you the things that he created, the tools that he created. It may even go on and say, no, he actually created 10,000. You weren't quite sure, but real quick, this is a bizarre question up front, but we can make it hallucinate. Yeah, here we go. Here's an answer where it's hallucinating. And this was taken like about a year ago, right? And we'll get to it in a second, but the funny thing is most of these examples, if you try today, they don't reproduce. But you think testers would test the systems, and secondly, try to reproduce them, and they don't reproduce them. They just kind of propagate these myths. Many people propagate the myths around hallucination. But the AIs are getting much smarter, and they just don't do this much anymore. But here's a couple ways you can also avoid hallucinations as a practical matter. One is give it an out. If you just say at the end of all your questions, if you don't know the answer, just say so. It's okay. Guess what they'll say? They'll just say, "Oh, sorry, I don't know." Like the problem is that they have to give you an answer, and if you don't give them, call it giving them an out, they will try to answer and make something to make you happy. So if we ask the same kind of question, but we say it's okay if you don't know, it says, "Hey, there may be a misunderstanding or mix-up here, right, with the timeline of the person." Like it's confused, but it's telling you it's confused. Basically, it's the most polite way to say it's a dumb question. Um, so one way, if you're asking questions of the LM and interacting with them, instead of asking just, is the answer A or B, right? Always remember it can and should have the option of having C or D, none of the above, and it will tell you. But if you ask a dumb question and you force it to give it an answer, it will give you an answer. Another big trick that no one realizes that can radically reduce the amount of error and also increase the confidence in your usage of LLMs in a testing context is to ask it for its confidence. Like if I ask you a question, a random question about anything, and you have to give me an answer. You give me an answer, right? If you're only kind of confident, you'll just say you give your answer. But if I say, how confident are you on a scale of like 0 to 10? You can give me a number, right? If you say 10 out of 10, I know you're pretty sure that it's the correct answer. It's like on that game show, right? When they say, is that your final answer, right? You give it a chance to do that. If it says 2 out of 10, guess what? Ignore the answer, either in chatting or from an API call. Get back that number on the API call and just throw the response out if it's 2 out of 10. In my practical experience, usually something a 7 out of 10 or higher is, generally speaking, pretty useful. Like very low error rates. Of course, it'll depend, very contextual, but 7 out of 10 is pretty good. Right, in this case, it says its confidence is 0. Like it's basically saying, again, it's a bizarro question. And a lot of the questions you'll see on LinkedIn and things, if you apply these techniques, you replay the same scenario. People say, "Oh, the LM is dangerous for testing, or it's not reliable." If you just add these 2 little tricks to it, a couple of the ones too here, it gives you the right answer. So it's really that people are not competent, or they don't understand how to use the tool. But more importantly, if you look at it, you realize that they don't want the tool to work. Is the real story. So another note on hallucination. This is this is even an academic version of people looking for hallucinations and problems, sometimes where they don't exist, and where they may be comparing apples and oranges and stuff. It's an interesting paper, and there's some interesting critique of it. But even academia falls into this trap, right? Of asking goofy questions and getting a goofy answer. But A, humans will do that, and B, LMs will definitely do that. If you ask a goofy question, so does Google search. If you type in a really bizarre query and you get bizarre search results back, guess what? It's your problem. It's your fault, and it's up to you to process the output. Another last little note on hallucination is I also went back, and of course I'm not getting my PhD, so I don't, and I'm busy, so I don't have the time. But I went back. I am a nerd though, and I went back and grabbed some white papers, some published papers from I think it was Stanford or one from Berkeley that lists a bunch of hallucinations, right? Examples of hallucinations from LLMs, back on like GPT, 3.0 or 3.5 or something, and they were kind of, I mean, they were forced. A lot of hallucinations they were kind of forced, like we talked about, but they were weird answers. The funny thing is, if you ask, even without the tricks I just showed you, if you ask those same questions today, you don't get things that are hallucinations. It actually just says the right thing. And a lot of that, I think, is because the raw IQ of these machines has gone up dramatically. Like last year, maybe it was an 80 or 90 IQ. With the latest models, they're arguably, based on some testing, over 110, maybe 120. And I think what's going on is they're just sophisticated enough to realize that their own answer is wrong. So they apologize about it, and they don't need, and they don't make stuff up. They catch themselves before they say things that are incorrect. As these models are just getting smarter. So yeah, hallucinations are a thing, kind of technically, but in practicality, guess what? If you're asking for test cases for a search input text box, or if you're asking if there's any crashes in a log file, or you're asking about the UX design of a web page, um, you're not going to run into hallucinations. It's very, very rare. And again, only in cases where you ask it just crazy things. So if you're having a problem with hallucinations, rethink your prompts or rethink your own bias into, are you trying to actually make it hallucinate, or are you trying to make it useful? So net hallucinations are not a blocker for using AI and software testing. And in reality, a lot of that behavior is actually creativity, and it helps um, come up with things that don't exist. Like, what are the missing things on this page? What test cases might I be missing? When you ask those kind of questions, that hallucination creativity is a superpower feature. So don't let it block you, um, but do be careful and do give it outs and use those prompting tricks if you're doing software testing. Cheers.